Hey everybody, I'm so excited to have you join me. I'm Cody Horton, and I'm thrilled today to have my good friend Antoine Jenkins here. And today we're going to dive into just various topics on talent acquisition, diversity recruiting. Who knows? We might go off on something else. Antoine and I have a track record of that. Would you agree, Antoine?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate, you taking the time out and allowing us to chat and record it. It may not like how I look at the end of it, but I
Well,
don't
I
think,
never like how you look anyway, so that's not a
yeah.
problem. So we, but no, I've been trying to get you. This is why the reason this is so cool and special to me is I've been trying to get you on video to do a conversation for many, many years. I mean, you and I both know that, and so I'm thrilled that we're getting a chance to do this. So.
Yeah, you got me to the point that, you know, that we're at least this year, it's been, kind of a rough year, but I keep thinking about things. I'm outside, smoking a cigar, and these things are just running through my brain. And I'm like, I got to share with somebody besides just Cody.
Well, I've told you a number of times the world really deserves your insight and because you've got a lot of insight and people need to hear it because it's going to help someone. It helps me all the time. It's helped me for years. So one of the things that I think people need to know is you've got an amazing background. You've led recruiting and talent acquisition and a number of functions across a range of industries. And you've worked for a variety of companies, big and small, Walmart, Northwestern Mutual, Fleet Farm. You've covered functions, sourcing, recruiting operations, recruitment marketing, and you've done that at scale. I'd love to just have you take a little bit of time, and just share a little bit about the journey that you've been on and a little bit about your background.
Well, the journey has been full of special moments. Let's put it that way, in which I've learned a lot. Um, it's interesting as I look back on the things that I've done. I come from a middle class family. Both my parents worked for the federal government. I went to college at Marquette University, and they saved because they wanted me to be the first in the family on both sides of the family to actually go to college and graduate. And I remember my father telling me when I was graduating, because I said, I think I want to be a lawyer. And he laughed. He said, okay, if you want to be a lawyer, I'll pay. I'm like, no, I don't want to go to school anymore. So, I spent a couple of years in the military, in the army, serving over in Germany. And, I just kind of hopped into recruiting when my then fiance, who became my wife, who became my ex-wife, that's a different story. That and I said, we moved down to Dallas and answered an ad, and it was for a recruiting agency, and that's how I got started. And it's funny because a lot of times when I'm looking for opportunities, it says, must have this or must have that. And especially when it comes to technology. And I said, I spent 15 years in technology in recruiting, just solely doing that for the most part. And it's interesting because I don't have a lick of, well, I do have a little bit of knowledge when it comes to technology, but I learned it on the fly. I like to tell people that are interviewing folks, you know people like to talk. They like to tell about their background and what they've done. And I had a discussion once with a lawyer in Walmart, and he had a challenge for me. He said, you couldn't recruit lawyers. They won't talk to you. I said, oh, bet. Let's do this. Now, we never did get to do it. But my point to him was, all I have to do is ask one question, and people will tell me their life. They'll tell me all about what they do, how they do it. And if I say, oh, that sounds interesting, tell me a little bit more about it. And, it just starts to flow. And so going through a journey of looking for an opportunity, people say you must have this. I'm like, yeah, why do you must? You just have to have the aptitude and the desire to listen and learn. And that's what I've been doing over the years with the help of people like you. There's another guy that when I worked at Sabre, John Fulton. He was an HR business partner. He gave me a lot of direction when I first joined that organization. And so, it's to me, it's all about people, and it's all about their backgrounds, their level of knowledge, and what they're willing to share. And I found that that's key to anything, especially as a leader, as a manager of folks, a leader of folks. It's important that you understand where they came from and they understand where you came from. And we both have to be, somewhat flexible in terms of learning new things and how we digest the things that we're hearing.
Yeah, I hear you. A lot of what you're covering is about people's life experiences and being generally interested and curious about people. And one of the things that I'd love to get your thoughts on is when you're thinking about life experiences, how do you think those life experiences shape the individual?
Oh, wow. Yeah. The net of it is it shapes us all. You and I were having a conversation probably a couple of months ago about your background versus my background. You're Texas born, you like country music. I'll let that go. I mean, because
Yeah.
I've learned to like some country music. And but then you were telling the joke when you first started dating, you had to be careful who you dated because you grew up in a small town because they could be related to you. And I laughed my butt off because we're talking about dating outside of our race. I'm African American and so forth. And I said, that's interesting because where I grew up in DC, I mean, predominantly my interactions were people that looked like me. And I really didn't start to understand the differences of people till I hit college. And then with each job that I took moving forward. And what I found is, we talk about, diversity in terms of, ethnicity. I get that part, but I think it's more about your life experiences growing up. If you grew up in a middle class family, then there's certain things that you'll experience that somebody that grew up in an impoverished area would understand or would learn, or how they see things. And I think that's where diversity really comes into play. There's a gentleman that worked for me at one of the companies I work for. I won't share his name, but he worked for me. He was having a tough time learning certain things, and he'd come to me and talk about things. And me being Antoine, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Why are you saying that? Why are you doing this? Then we got in this really deep conversation because the gentleman would always talk about his accomplishments, even when the company that he worked for before, he talked about his accomplishments. And I remember, being a little bit befuddled. I said, wait a minute, but you had a team, didn't you? He said, yes. I said, well, how come you never mentioned the team? And the young man, he paused and a tear came to his eye. And I'm like, okay, what did I do this time? Verbally didn't make somebody cry a little bit, but he was reflecting back on how he grew up and how he really lacked support in his eyes from his father. His father never said good job. His father never did this or that to make him feel good about himself, and him understanding that he can spread that to other people. And so once I understood that, then my approach with him was a little bit different. I'd give a little bit more praise with correction. And years later, he sent me a note via LinkedIn, said, Antoine, my wife and I were having a conversation about the best manager we ever had. And I told her that you were the best manager I ever had. And, that kind of touched my heart. But, it goes to the core of diversity. It's just not what we look like, but it's really what's inside of us, what we've experienced over life that makes us think a certain way and do certain things.
Yeah. Yeah. You touched on a point. You and I've chatted about this a little bit before, and I've had these conversations recently. Can you kind of broaden that a little bit? What is diversity beyond the race and ethnicity? Because that's what I mean. Everybody wants to go there, right? They want to
Yep.
go to race and ethnicity. Can you talk about some of the things that make up that diversity?
The what makes up the diversity is, and you're going to hear me say it over and over again, is life experiences. If I never went to the military, would I understand the concept of backwards planning and understanding, how important roles are within a team, within an organization, how you have to cross train in case in time of war you lose somebody, you have to have somebody else step in, and if you've never been in the military in any form, you probably would never know that. If you do know it, it's going to look to you a little differently. So that's an example, but I find that I probably the best way I like to describe it is always tell a story. I got a story for everything, and it's funny, and this is a very touchy subject, but I'm about to say, but I had a boss of mine, and he played football. He was from northwest, Michigan area, someplace, and he got comfortable with me, and he said to me, I don't know, we were just talking about talk, and he mentioned about playing football out in the streets, and then there are different ways that you can hike a football between your legs, or you can go sideways. And we were talking about one particular way, which is sideways. And he said, well, when I was growing up, we used to call that, I don't know if I can say the word, the in way of hiking. So the N word of
Inward,
hiking.
huh?
Yeah. And I looked at him, I said, what? He looked
Wow.
at me and said, well, yeah, that's what we called it because, our assumption was, it's a lazy way of hiking. And so I said, interesting. I said, well, if you're playing out in the streets, the last thing you want to do is be looking between your legs to hike a ball if you're playing football. So guess what? You do it a different way. So when you see where the car is coming, to get off the road. And I said, that's the purpose of hiking it a different way. And he looked at me and he was surprised that I engaged versus saying, what the devil are you talking about? Do you know who you're talking to? The African American part of me wanted to jump around and beat him upside his head. But the reality is how he grew up, the area that he lived in, middle class white family. He was a football player when he went to college, and he was a pretty boy. Everybody liked the pretty boy that I'm talking about. Right. And that in and of itself, I had to really come to grips with who I am during that conversation, as to not respond how people would say people like me would typically respond. And so that's a story, but the little things like this that are not related to race have always been a part of me. I had a conversation with an executive with a different firm, and he said, Antoine, and again, he felt comfortable enough to ask the question I'm about to say. He said, Antoine, what is it like being, the only African American in a meeting? And I said, you know what? It's interesting. I said, I'm going to tell you something that you probably don't know. When I go into a meeting and there's a diverse group of people, by ethnicity, I mean diverse, I have to be aware of everybody. And not just the white male, but more so Black females, Black males, people that may come from a different origin, maybe Asian, could be anything else. I have to be cognizant of all of them too, because at least in the Black community, how I grew up and the understanding was, sometimes it's the crabs in a pot mentality. You step on one to get above the other. And I always had to keep that in mind, because I never wanted to come off as I'm better than you. I always want to come off it as we all have something to bring. Let's bring it to the table and come to the conclusion or decision in terms of what we're going to do. And he looked at me, said, wow. He said, I didn't think that would be your answer. I said, yeah, most people don't think about it that way. You think about it from a way of, since I'm black, the white man's there and he's in power. Well,
Right.
I just wish we could get rid of the whole concept of color. Maybe I could say the Irish man there is going to get mad at me, or the Latinos are going to get mad at me, but we always break it down to color of skin when it comes to dealing with African Americans, which we should stop. Um, it's just the how you brought up and then life experiences make more of an impact to you. There was something that I wrote down before we got on the call, and I said and I wrote the word if. And there is a poem by Richard Kipling said if. But when I think about if, I'm like, what if I grew up poor? What if I grew up in a different environment? I had a mother, had a father. And then when I start thinking about it, I think about people that I know that are like me, that grew up single family homes, but they're successful, and yeah, I have to ask myself, okay, well, why is that? And I know the answer, because in the world, it's a community effort. So if we're all in it together and we're all watching out for each other, that's you develop a knack for understanding people, listening to people, and finding ways to convince them what you're bringing to the table is something important without becoming overbearing.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot there. I mean, it kind of hits on that point you were talking about, how you're impacted by upbringing, right?
Yep.
And so you were able to bring that to not only your corporate world, but just generally how you approach life. It sounds like.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even with that, I think that if your life experiences have people helping you, I look back when I was in college, and there's a professor that helped me out. There was another professor that helped me out. They didn't look like me, but it was their job, but they didn't have to go above and beyond the way they did. And I always figured it's because of how I approached them in a non-antagonistic way and seeking help. Because I don't know of anybody that doesn't want to help somebody. Now, sometimes they want to help in off ways, but everybody wants to help somebody. And I tell a story in terms of the community raising kids and having an impact, particularly on me. I was told not to ride my bike out the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And well, you know what I did? I rode my bike out the neighborhood because I was going to see a young lady who lived, I don't know, way across town. And so I take my bike, they had no brakes, and I pedal my butt off to go visit her. Then I pedal my way back. I was in good shape then. Can't do it now. Um, and I get home and my father said, where were you? He didn't use those terms, but he did say, where were you?
Yeah.
He said, I was down in Anthony's house. He said, I'm going to ask you again. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not changing my story now because I know I'm and I said it again. And my brother was standing around and he was shaking his head. Tony, that's my nickname. Tony, don't, no, don't say it. I'm like, I'm sticking with it. Well, needless to get to I won't get to the point of the outcome of what happened because, of course, I got in trouble. But
Yeah.
what I found out was the next door neighbor across the street, Mr. Gordon, had saw me riding my bike. And he just happened to mention to my father that I was riding my bike on Silver Hill Road, which is not close to where I live and grew up. And so, that's the community, lesson learned there.
Yeah.
What if something had happened to me and I was missing? Well, you know what? The neighbor knows who I am and they share.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about the what ifs in terms of how we grew up and, how we were treated when we were young, how we were supported when we were young, um, you know, that that's diversity in and of itself, because then you think about things differently. You think about, when you're spending time in Germany and you don't speak, you're learning a little bit of German, but you understand people, you say, okay, well, everything that I heard is maybe not true because the interactions I'm having are positive, the people that are meeting are good people. And I think that that affects us a lot in terms of, our jobs, what we choose to do, how we choose to share information. And don't get me wrong, I've had my moments in which I've, I've said to people, I'm sorry, you haven't talked to me in the 3 years I'm here. Now you want to give me some advice? I'm not listening to you. That's kind of what I said to the gentleman.
Yeah.
But it was like, I either we're there to help each other no matter what it is, or, because we all have a goal. We all want to make a lot of money, be in a position of power, blah, 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 blah. But I've come through years of experience to understand, for me, I just want to enjoy doing what I'm doing and helping people get to where they want to get. Because if you
Yeah.
help them in the corporate setting, that means you have to understand them. That means you have to be blind to what you see and more cognizant of what you're hearing from them and how they're doing certain things. And it that makes me feel good, but that comes with wisdom. Being the age that I am now, all those life's experience, which I can go on for hours with it, to talk about the things that have impacted me, made me who I am. And a lot of times it's looking back, Cody. And yeah, it's real. And I think we need to get to it. And businesses need to understand that everybody doesn't have to be like you. Everybody doesn't have to think like you. You don't want people thinking like you. You want somebody that's thinking different than you. That
Yeah.
rounds out that circle, and it makes for smarter business decisions. It makes for smarter people decisions. And it helps any culture cross the line to say, oh, no, that person's not like that because they're this. This person is like this because they experience this life. And we take it out of the context of race or ethnicity. We make it more about who people are and where they come from.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. One of the things with the workforce, there's so many generations in the workforce right now, right? We got brand new people who are just getting started in their career, and we got people who've been working and doing this work for a long time, who created some wisdom. One of the things you touched on is this wisdom thing. You know, there's the knowledge of doing a work, and then there's wisdom that comes from some of the knowledge. Uh, my point here is from a perspective on diversity, because we have older people in the job market and in the workforce. I've had people talk about the fact that, look, I've got a lot of wisdom here, and bringing a lot to the table, but I believe that there's ageism at play.
Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it pisses me off. It does. And it's real. And I had a friend of mine really put into context for me. Buddy of mine, hired him into Microsoft. We've been friends ever since. We were sitting at his house, and this was a couple of years ago, and smoking a cigar, having some scotch, bourbon, and we're just chit chatting. I said, "Man, JB, I don't get this." I said, I know that I'm of this age, but I can do the job. I know the information." And he laughed at me. He said, I can't use the words that he said. He said, "My friend, do you not remember?" I said, "Do I not remember what?" He said, "Do you not remember how we were when we were at Microsoft, and what we thought about the older people that were coming in or that were there?" And I'm like, oh shit. Yes, I do remember. So what I'm complaining about is, as an older person, we used to dismiss because we knew older people weren't going to be flexible, because we came in with that mindset. And the question is, I still can't figure out how I developed that mindset.
Yeah.
But yet it took somebody just in conversation, again, smoking a cigar, to remind me, yeah, you used to do that when you were 30 some odd years old, even when you're probably in your early 40s, you used to do that, because you know, I don't see myself being older until really I started to hit my 50s. And I'm not gonna tell you where I am now, but that's it's a little tough thing to get through every now and then. But that caused me to look back, to think about what I've learned. And I said, you know what? You can't be wise and young. You can be a wise fool,
Right.
but the wisdom you gain through life experiences, which then when you get to that point in time in life, 50s, 60s, 70s for some, you know, your perspective is different because of all the stuff that you've done and that you've experienced, that your mind is saying, hey, remember this? Remember that? And it's very impactful when you think about it that way. But I don't expect my kids to understand that right now. But what I do is I try my best to impart that information to them while they're young, even more so than my parents did while I was young, because it's important for them to at least hear it once, hear it twice, hear it 3 times, because then when they hear from the outside, they say, oh, I remember having that conversation with my father.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird how you remember you're saying things now that you heard your parents say. It's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
like
I it's funny. I think I shared with you there was one thing that happened. Both my parents have passed. My father passed in 2020, 2005 or 2007. And then my mother passed a couple of years ago. And my going through the house, going through information, and I found this document in which my father filed an EEOC complaint to the job that he worked at for the position that they passed him over for, although he was already operating in that position at that role for a number of years before some things changed. And the funny thing about this is I told my brother, I said, did you know about this? He said, no. I said, I wish my father would have shared it with me because
mm,
it gives me a perspective. It could even change how I approach certain things because I'm a person that if it's, if I run into something just doesn't make sense, I have an option, you know, hear it, deal with it the way that I need to deal with it, but I keep moving forward. So that means that sometimes I'm not holding accountable to the way you hike a football. I'm just educating and then moving on. But sometimes you have to address that too, but you don't know how to, so you don't.
right.
And so, I to this day, God rest his soul, I'm like, I wish you would have shared that. Then I start thinking, what other roadblocks did he come up with? Did he endure that I could have learned from?
Yeah. 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 No, it's a great point. It's interesting. That experience that your father had could have shed light on things for you, to your point. And I'm thinking about the fact that in the job search for a candidate, the people doing the interviewing in the hiring process are having to make a decision. Really, the recruiters are making a decision on experience versus aptitude, right?
Yep.
How do you kind of weigh these in the hiring process? And what would you would like to share about that, right? Because do we get a person that doesn't have the experience and have them do this job because they're cheaper, or do we go with the experienced person?
So the way and I've done this for the last couple of companies that I've been in, and what I do is, especially if I'm recruiting for somebody, um, I have a box in my head. I have 4 corners of that box, and I never want to present 20, 30 people to a hiring manager and say, tell me who you want to talk to. After doing that intake session and doing what I do, I come back and I fill that box because the person here may have all the attributes and skills that a person's talking about, but I then think that this person here has doesn't have as much as the other person, but has aptitude. And then I think about this person here who could just be a rock star because they're smart, they're articulate. And when I present candidates, they don't know what I'm doing, but this is what I'm doing. I'm presenting a box or a circle, whatever you want to call it, that runs the gamut. And then when we're sitting there talking about the candidates, he says, well, they don't have this. Well, but this is what they have. And based on where we are culturally in the organization, I believe that this person is a viable person to go through the process. And I'd say probably 8 times out of 10, because I'm not going to use the adage 9 times out of 10. It's like 8 times out of 10, that person makes it through that makes it through the final round. And in order for that to be successful, though, I, as a recruiter, have to be very honest and direct with that hiring manager. And that is, your expectations are a little off. And I would put it in a different way depending on who I'm talking to, but your expectations are a little off because I'm thinking about your organization, and everybody in your organization is the same, comes from the same cut. You have no diversity there. You have no diversity in thought. You have no diversity in, you just stick with the word. You have no diversity there.
Right.
And so we as recruiters, our responsibility used to be, I don't know that it's happening today, but it used to be, we control that. Yeah, here's a prime example. Before I get off on too much of a tangent. When I was at Sabre, having a conversation with the SVP over technology, and he wanted me to do a search for a vice president. And I listened to him. He talked about what he had, and I said what he was looking for. I said, do you not have anybody that's already doing this in the role, or that's just missing one or two things that you can actually, put them in a role that lets them develop it and then move them into their VP role? And I said, if you do that, this is what it does for your organization. People that work there say, oh, he's really for developing people internally and promoting them. And I said, so when you do that, then your backfill could be another looking for somebody that needs to progress. And here's the selfish part of me. When I get down past the top 2 or 3, then it's easier for me to go find a technologist that can learn, that can fit the culture, learn this and that and everything else. And, we're all successful. We're not spending 6 months looking for that one person that we still can't find.
Right.
Because I bought a different solution. You know what he did? He said, that makes sense.
Wow.
Now, I thought about that, but I also went to the HR business partner and said, hey, John, this is my thought. What do you think? To get advice. And he gave me advice. And, if we look at our business as a business, and we're the professionals of that business, we're the owners of that business, then our outcomes can be different. We don't have to have, 1,000 people applying for a job in a day, which is crazy nowadays. And we're having to figure out how to go through it. But now we have technology, AI, that sparses people out. But it's only doing it based on what you said that you would need, which is tangible stuff, versus what intangible things that they bring.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. You mentioned storytelling early on, and how has storytelling really have played a role in your life or influenced your work life?
It allows me to communicate in a different way. You and I have worked together for a long time, and we know each other. So when you and I are talking, it's just a direct conversation. No, Cody, that shit doesn't make no sense. I don't understand what you really. No, we need to do this. And then, if for those of you who have met Cody before, that smile just diffuses everything. And he's always a soft person. It's a lot, because I was talking to somebody the other day. I'm like, yeah, Cody has a lot of patience. I don't have that much patience. I said, but then when you put Cody in a corner, it's all bets are off. But it takes a lot to get him in the corner. It doesn't take a lot to get me in the corner. And so, and now I've lost the question. See, that's what I do.
Well, you're telling the story. You're doing exactly what we talked about, right? And the question was around, hey, how has the storytelling impacted your, your work life or even personal life?
Yeah, well, personally, I don't know. Most most of
It's all lies.
yeah, females that I know don't like my stories, but I don't, yeah, I don't like my stories. But it's important, and it's a different way of communicating. I find that communication is key, and I don't know how I've learned it or how I came around to having that thought. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I can't figure it out. I do remember there were two training courses that I had. One was on negotiations, and the person that they brought in to do it was uh, an agent, a sports agent. And I still remember to this day what I learned from that in order to close the deal, in order to understand what people want, get the soft spots, and make it happen. And then another training that I went to was, public speaking. I mean, I always said I could speak, but then I learned the little nuances about body language, eye language, the pause, the getting rid of the ums like I'm doing right now. It's those are two things that I've learned that just have solidified the ability to communicate to different people. There is one other example when I was at a conference, and the lady who was speaking had a question, and she's Chinese, and she couldn't figure out the word. She couldn't figure out how to say it in English because most people there were English. And I looked at it, I said, just say it in your native language. Because I knew what the topic was about. And so she said it. And I said, okay, this is what I think you're saying. She said, yes, that's it. And then people ask me, Antoine, you know Mandarin? I'm like, nope. I said, now I've been thanks to the Walmart, went to China at least 5, 6, 7 times, got to know people, got to understand people. And so if you listen, it's just the little things that you'll pick up on that you can bring to the table that helps the situation. And it helped her out at that time.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I know we're getting close. We're on the
Yes.
time. We're right there. But before we wrap up, Antoine, what can what can you talk about with your experience, and how you've adapted and how you've learned from the experience to kind of progress your career, that you could share with people?
I would say the key for me and how I've made it to where I am is that I listen and I'm honest. And I think that those two things help propel me. Now, there's still things that happen that become roadblocks, but I'm always good with myself. And as long as I listen and and make people feel as that they're good people, and it's not an attacking way, they will listen to you. At least I'd say 70% will listen to you. The other 30%, well, they get the old Antoine, and then that's it. But that has allowed me to move up. But I also know what I want. I know from a leadership perspective the type of leader that I can't work well for. The use the old adage micromanagement that doesn't work for me, because I always go back to my military days. You tell me where you want to go and when you want to get there, and I'll come back with a plan to tell you how we're going to do it, what we're going to do it, some mitigating risks that we have that either I've uncovered and solved or that we still have to solve to move forward. That's my lay of the land whenever I talk. And I go back to that military piece, life experience.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, Antoine, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time and being gracious with your time and doing this. It's amazing. Hopefully this is not the last one that we do. We'll get a chance to do some more and pick your brain on some other stuff, but this has been great.
I hope so, because
Appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it. And there's just a lot of stuff in my brain right now. Even when you go a little bit outside of TA, it's the people part of me.
Yeah, well, I know that. That's why I've been telling you for years, man. You got to get this stuff out there because people need to hear what you've got in your mind. So really
Thank you.
appreciate it, Antoine. Looking forward to the next time.
Awesome.